Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. It is I, the notoriously sanctimonious RMB, here on this May 25th, a Memorial Day holiday weekend here in the United States. Very exciting. Holiday weekends are always exciting. They're sort of lazy. I've been doing some home projects here. Going to spin around my computer, and I want to remind everyone, well, I'm reminding you for the first time, I'm doing another show tonight at 9 p.m. with Lucas Kendall, the creator, the writer, the director, the producer of Skyfighter, the crowdfunded science fiction short that I edited. And he will be here answering questions about independent filmmaking. What is it like to crowdfund the movie? Where did he get the idea from? And his plans, and hopefully my plans too, for the feature film of Skyfighter. So that will be tonight at 9 p.m. right here on my YouTube channel, the Burnettwork. So that's something new. So first of all, I want to say hello, all of you imagination connoisseurs. Welcome to this, the Post-Geek Singularity community on this, a momentous day. There's so much that I woke up this morning and I'm like, what am I going to talk about today? I kind of got a little heavy this week, and I figured that I realized today's date. What is today's date? It's May 25th. Why is this date a momentous day in my life? Well, two reasons, basically, and both of them were movies that were released on this date. One was released 40 years ago today in the United States, and that would be Ridley Scott's seminal Alien. In my mind, one of what I would call a very select few perfect films. I think Alien is absolutely a perfect movie. There's not a thing I would change. And before you all say, oh, contraire, what about Ridley Scott himself? He trimmed a little bit of it and released a director's cut. I understand. If you look into Ridley Scott's oeuvre, many of his films have multiple versions, but I think the theatrical cut of Alien that was released on this day 40 years ago today is one of the most unbelievable and indelible films, a pastiche of both horror and science fiction, and basically about a bunch of blue-collar truck drivers in space who stumble into something that they are woefully unprepared to deal with. Now, the thing about Alien was, it was sort of the second in a 1-2 punch of movies that really did change my life. And I would be remiss if I did not also mention that yesterday, May 24th, 1979, was also the day that another, probably the third film in my young life that shaped me to this day, George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, was given a general release on May 24th, 1979. Now, some people will say, well, come on, Rob. It really came out in 1978. Yes, it was first shown theatrically in, I think it was Turin, Italy, in 1978. But it wasn't generally released. It had been shown in America and other places and festivals, but its general release was May 24th, 1979. The next day, Alien came out. And when, in my hometown of Seattle, there was a theater on the corner of 6th and Blanchard, ground zero for my imagination, where both Alien and Dawn of the Dead were playing at the same time, the UA 150 and the UA 70. And it was my favorite movie theater in the world to this day. They blew it up. Charlton Heston would not have been pleased. One of the saddest days of my life was being taken down to the former location of that. For those of you who want to know where that is, where Amazon headquarters is, where they've built those biospheres, those cool biospheres. It was on the other end of the street, right across the street, on 6th and Blanchard. That's where the celebrated UA 150 theater was. Star Wars played their longer first run, well, almost longer. I think it might have been the second longest first run of Star Wars anywhere in the world. It was a theater. It was like my holy church. It even kind of looked more like a mosque because it had this giant golden dome. And it was hallowed ground as far as I was concerned. But anyway, before I go on with my remembrances of movies that really meant a lot to me, I want to remind all of you that this particular vlog or podcast or videocast or YouTube show, this YouTube show is brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's Grooming Products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And as all of you know, I just used their facial their face scrub on my face before I got onto this chat. I love Lucky Tiger products. And if you want to, you can go to their website at getluckytiger.com and you can buy whatever you want to your heart's content. And when you use the code PGS, Post-Geek Singularity, for this community, you get 20% off your entire order. So thanks to Lucky Tiger for that. But today, I know it's the 42nd anniversary of the release of Star Wars, but I didn't have my own YouTube channel 2 years ago when it was the actual 40th anniversary. So I woke up this morning and the first thing I thought about was, oh my God, today is the real Star Wars Day. All this nonsense about May the 4th be with you. I get it, it's a play on words, but actual Star Wars Day was, and ever shall be May 25th. May 25th is Star Wars Day. There were so many. We had the anniversary of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom this week. I mean, what was interesting was in my young life, May 25th or this week was sort of the week that had been staked out by Lucas to put out his movies, or 20th Century Fox to put out their. It was really the beginning of that summer movie season to me. It was the first time I was aware of the fact that May was a special movie month. But I wanted to talk about, because I really haven't, I might have mentioned it on certain shows, but how much Star Wars actually meant to me and shaped my life. Because it truly was a life-changing experience. And I know a lot of people say that, but I figured I'm pretty much older than a lot of you. I know there's some people that are older than myself, but judging from my YouTube analytics, I'm old. I'm an OG geek. I've said it before, and I have always used Star Wars because it's in my own life. I have to make it about me after all. I've always used Star Wars, at least in terms of media, as the demarcation point where it was the beginning of the post-geek singularity. And that is, it was the beginning of science fiction, fantasy, and horror as a genre starting to burst forth beyond the fan base, beyond aficionados, and penetrate into the popular consciousness. Star Wars was really ground zero for that. And it's really difficult to explain to people who weren't there what it was like, because Star Wars was literally a pop culture tsunami. It hit the pop culture, not unlike the asteroid in Armageddon or in Deep Impact that could have hit the Earth, but its presence was felt everywhere. Every political column you read, say in the New York Times, every op-ed piece, invariably there was a Star Wars cartoon. I mean, it penetrated the popular culture. You can't even imagine. Now, during the 70s, I was a kid. I was born on May 15th, 1967. Yes, I am 52 years old. And I'm sure right now, a lot of people that are either watching this live or will watch it later. I know the comments section is filled up with like, hey, you gray-haired old man, why don't you get off your lawn? I get a lot of that. I'm like, I can't help it. You know, what can I say? I'm as old as I am. And like I always tell people, I'm younger than my grandfather and younger than my father. What can I do? You're all going to get there. You might as well continue to enjoy your life. Am I right? So anyway, I sort of feel like I should set the stage. What is it like to be an OG geek? Well, certain things that happened in my lifetime since I was born, the significant ones in terms of being a science fiction, fantasy, and horror film aficionado, there were some really important things that were happening. First of all, when I was a kid, right after I was born, the original Planet of the Apes had come out. That was 1968. 2001 came out. And these were obviously unbelievably, probably at the time, I mean, Stanley Kubrick's 2001 still stands as probably everyone considers it to be the greatest science fiction film ever made. Planet of the Apes was a very highbrow science fiction release. It was based on Pierre Boulez's novel, written by Rod Serling. The Twilight Zone had gone off the air in 1964. It aired from 59 to 64. And during the 60s, we had the rise of science fiction television. You had Irwin Allen producing Lost in Space, Land of the Giants, Time Tunnel, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Amazing. I mean, some were more amazing than others, but certainly as a kid, I was seeing these shows in syndication because I didn't like a lot of kid shows. I was very interested in watching shows about adults, But the Planet of the Apes movies, I was seeing them on television. We had 5 stations in Seattle. We had ABC, NBC, CBS. We had our local PBS affiliate and an independent station. We later had 2 independent stations, Channel 11 and Channel 13. But Channel 11 had Sci-Fi Theater on every Sunday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, where I discovered many science fiction classics as a kid, including George Powell's movies, Conquest of Space, When Worlds Collide, War of the Worlds. Sometimes they'd play Destination Moon, but it wasn't in heavy rotation. I saw Godzilla movies, all kinds of films, also terrible movies like Invasion of the Star Creatures. And sometimes I'd see movies like They Came from Beyond Space, which I thought was this really serious, portentous science fiction movie. It's really not very good, but there's a character named the Moon Master in it that I thought was really cool as a kid. Our PBS affiliate, I want to say it was our PBS affiliate, was airing Jerry Anderson's UFO. Star Trek, of course, had gone into strip syndication in 1972, so that changed my life. And on Channel 11, that also had Sci-Fi Theater, I was able to see, I think I've had a lot of coffee this morning. I had 2 cups I've still got some left. I figured I wanted all my mind to be sharp. So so Channel 11 aired Star Trek. They aired The Twilight Zone, which I was obsessed by. Outer Limits was on then, and of course Outer Limits was also early 60s along with Twilight Zone. So there was a heady and pulpy mix of sci-fi awesomeness from the time I was born to the time that Star Wars was released in 1977. And I don't know, for whatever reason, I was already completely obsessed by anything to do with science fiction, fantasy, or horror. Loved it all. And I remember hearing like TV commercials for The Exorcist or radio commercials. It was mostly the radio commercials I remember as a kid for The Exorcist. And I knew I wanted to see it, but my parents were like, no way. The first PG movie I ever saw in the theater was what was it? It wasn't The Land Before Time. It was The Land That Time Forgot. The Land That Time Forgot was the first PG movie I ever saw in the theater. The second PG movie I ever saw in the theater was in 1975. I saw Jaws with my best friend Jeff Swafford. Blew my mind. You know, it was amazing when Matt Hooper pulls the head. Ben, I forget Ben. Why am I drawing a blank on his name? You all know Ben's boat pulls the head out. I'd never seen anything like that. It blew my mind. So you had Outer Limits, you had Twilight Zone, you had Star Trek, all the Irwin Allen shows. I was seeing movies whenever I could. There was no VCRs, but whenever there was something interesting, I would watch. My mother would bring home the TV guide every Wednesday when she did the grocery shopping. And I used to go through the TV guide and circle things that sounded interesting. And I was obsessed with, my bedtime was probably 9 o'clock, I think. And I was obsessed with science fiction, fantasy, and horror. So whenever something sounded interesting, especially late night, you know, you'd have to scour the TV guide late night and see what movies were playing. And there was only like 2 or 3, and I would circle them. And then it was also the era of, there was a lot of science fiction, fantasy, and horror made for television movies and they were good. Stuff like that I remember, Satan's School for Girls, the Stranger Within with Barbara Eden, Killdozer. Maybe that was later. I don't know what. Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, the original Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. So if you were a kid and if you were resourceful, and of course I loved comic books. My mom somehow was buying me Justice League of America comics every month when they came out. I was collecting Justice League, and I started around the late 90s, I think, whenever that was, issues 90 or something. But my mom would buy those. And I remember my favorite things were any issue that Red Tornado was on the cover, because I love Red Tornado. And my favorite thing in the world was when the Justice League and the Justice Society of America had their team ups. That was great. And I was also seeing a lot of movies. I mean, I was a movie fanatic. My parents were taking me to movies. Our local, the schools in my local school district on Mercer Island would show films in auditoriums, like in high school or the junior high gymnasiums on the weekends, the high school gymnasium. Mercer Crest Elementary, I remember seeing, they showed Pinocchio in outer space, which I really loved. And then I loved the Disney live action films. I loved Island at the Top of the World, even though I don't know if I haven't seen it in a while. I loved the Herbie movies, I would go see those. Even Disney movies that like Candle Shoe and Treasure of Matacumbe and the Apple Dumpling Gang. I mean, I loved all that stuff. I was going to all that stuff. But the movie that really solidified the first mind-blowing experience, I mean, after Jaws was mind-blowing, but in a different kind of a way. I mean, Jaws was obviously more realistic, and even though it was a horror film, it was sort of a nature. I didn't think of Jaws as sort of a fantasy movie because I thought of it could happen. You know, there's nothing in Jaws that I was like, oh, that's a cautionary tale. That could totally be real. The thing that I think perhaps solidified my love of movies was in 1976. And that was seeing Logans Run. I saw Logans Run at the John Dan's Theater, which was in Bellevue, Washington, another huge big box theater. It was ginormous, that theater. And I saw movies, Logans Run I saw in 1976, and I was 9. I think I was 9. I think it was before my birthday. And Logans Run, opening night, I'd seen commercials for it, domed city, Sandmen running around. I didn't know what Sandmen were, cool weapons and hot girls. That I knew, that's what I knew. And even at 9, I'd already had a love of not just science fiction, but I loved women too, even as a 9-year-old. And the original Star Trek and James Bond movies. By the way, James Bond movies were big at the time too. When the ABC Sunday night movie would play them, it was always a ritual with my parents. I'd have to beg them to stay up because they were long. So it was always past my bedtime. And when they would start a James Bond movie that was a longer one, like Thunderball would play in like a 3-hour time slot, it would probably be over at 11. And there was always a negotiation that I had to go through with my parents. I had to like beg them and promise I would do extra chores to stay up past my bedtime, but it was worth it for James Bond movies. So I was obsessed. I was really obsessed by all this. I was building Star Trek model kits and I was building flying model rockets. I mean, I was into it. I was an OG, but I was, I think, a well-rounded OG. I read a lot of books. As a result of Star Wars, that was when I started reading. When I was 10, I joined the science fiction book club. But that's the kind of kid I was before Star Wars came out. So basically, I was already an addict. And even though I didn't know it, what I was looking for was my something like I was, if this were akin to being a drug addict, I had already taken my gateway drugs. I was already there. You know, I was already, whether it was alcohol or weed or whatever you want to call it. I didn't know that there was crack. I mean, Star Trek was close. Star Trek was already cocaine for me. I was completely addicted to Star Trek. And Channel 11 was showing Star Trek every night at 6 o'clock. And my parents were very indulgent. I didn't matter what I was doing. I was a really social kid. I liked people. I would organize events. I mean, we had a big neighborhood of kids. So I was a very social kid. I was in Cub Scouts at the time. I was in Indian Guides before that. I went to Sunday school to Temple D. Hirsch on Sundays. So I was an inquisitive kid too. But I was completely addicted to pursuits of the imagination. Total addict. I didn't know yet that there was basically the equivalent of crack, the crack epidemic, that it was rolling down toward me. Had no idea. Now, this was before I was buying Starlog magazine. I think the first 6 issues of Starlog had come out. I didn't know because my world was small. You know, you're 9 years old and it's not like you were off on your own yet. I didn't start riding the metro system in Seattle until I was 10. I didn't know what was out there. There was no way to know. You couldn't know. There was no internet. There was no way to know anything about the wider world for an OG geek like myself. It was just what I could get in my house or what I would go see in the store. You know, I remember, this is another, this relates to a letter I'm going to read later, a communication. Mego, the toy company. This is another, let me tell you about what I was into in terms of toys. I loved action figures. I loved model kits, building models. But at the time in the mid 70s, the big things for me were 12-inch G.I. Joes, because they had all kinds of, if you look up 12-inch G.I. Joes from the 60s and 70s, now because of Vietnam, G.I. Joes were no longer G.I. Joes. They weren't military figures. They were adventure team figures. They were worldwide adventurers. I loved G.I. Joes. So I was constantly making up movies in my head with my G.I. Joe figures. And then Mego dropped the world's greatest superhero figures. Now, those were 8 inches. They also made Big Jim, but I didn't care about Big Jim. I never got into Big Jim. But so Mego had dropped Superman and Batman. And the first Mego Batman figure had the removable cowl. Now, if you look into that, that was a big deal. So you had the removable cowl figure. So this is what I was even playing. All the toys I wanted were either G.I. Joe, or Mego action figures. And then I also loved Evel Knievel figures because they were also sort of 8-inch figures, but they were bendable. But again, great vehicles, motorcycles. You had the Evel Knievel scramble van. They later had the Snake River rocket that he tried to jump. So anything that I could make up stories with. But I was very specific. I was a kid that only wanted those things. Then, of course, later on, we got Micronauts from Mego when they imported the toys from Japan. And they also, there's one of, the Shogun Warriors. So what, and I didn't know this at the time either, but Mattel started bringing over what they called Shogun Warriors. And they were taking Japanese super robots, such as, Raiden. Well, they Go Nagai's Getter Robo G, Poseidon, Dragon, and Getter Liger, but it was Getter Poseidon, Getter Dragon, and Getter Liger, and they called it what did they call it? Raider, a Getter Raider, and then there was Raiden. So they were bringing over these from various Japanese super robot shows, but they were selling them as Shogun Warriors. I love those two because they were clearly space robots of some kind or something. I just didn't know, and I already loved Japanese sci-fi. So anyway, that's the stage. That's the kid I was. That's the kid let's be honest. It's the kid I am right now. I'm just old and gray, but a kid at heart. So I remember being at my friend Jeff Swafford's house, and he was my best friend. Still know him, by the way. And we shared our back fences intersected. Like his house was here and my house was here. And we were such good friends that our fathers decided one day that where our gate intersected, they would just build a gate that would open because we had wood, those big, tall wood fences. They actually built a door between our backyards so we could move freely. If I wanted to just walk into Jeff's house, I could walk into Jeff's house. And I remember this clear as day. The first time I ever heard of Star Wars, I had no inkling that anything like this was happening. He had in their family room, I call it family room, TV room, whatever you want to call it, rumpus room, the biggest room in their house where kids would gather. We had one too. He had one of these big high back, like half a sphere chair, but it was made out of wood or wicker or something, and it had these big cushions in it. And we used to sit in it, and you'd spin each other around until you were so dizzy you were either going to throw up or fall on the ground. And I'll never forget, the TV was on, and I'm being spun around in this chair because that's what you did. I mean, it was equivalent of, and suddenly this commercial comes on for Star Wars. It was a movie of heroes and villains and pictures of Vader and Luke and Leia swinging. I didn't know what the hell this was. I remember I'm like, stop. And I remember looking at the TV and I'm like, it was a switch. Like I'd never seen anything. There was nothing analogous to this in my experience. I'm watching this commercial and it was, as a kid I've already given you the background, anything, I would watch anything. By the way, I also loved the space program. We stopped landing on the moon in 1972, but beyond that, one of the greatest real events in my life was in 1975 when the Russians, during the period of détente, the Americans and the Russians linked up in orbit. There was the Apollo-Soyuz mission. Now, I had built as a kid, because I built models, I had built the command module, I built the Eagle, and I had model kits in my room, and of the command module and the LEM, the Lunar Excursion Module, linked up. And those model kits would always come with gold foil. I love those model kits. So I was really into space. But so in 1975, which was the year before Logan's Run came out, the Apollo-Soyuz mission linked up in space. So for real, this amazing event, like I already love the Apollo astronauts, and I used to know all their names. I don't now, but that was a huge event in 75. It was 8. And I built an Apollo-Soyuz model, the linked up model, that I gave to my grandfather, and he had that model that I gave him in 1975 in his house in his den until he passed away in 2008. So I was into this stuff. So when the TV commercial for Star Wars came on, I had this radar for anything to do with science fiction, fantasy. I didn't horror, whatever it was, didn't matter what it was. That's why I would puzzle over paperback books at the local drugstore, Lakeside Drugs, because they had a great paperback section. I would pick all of them up and buy them and read a lot of them. So when the commercial for Star Wars came on, it was like, ding, my radar, and I was transfixed, and I felt that this movie was mine, that it was my movie, that somebody had actually made a movie for me. No one else, just for me. And no one else cared. Everyone's like, oh, it's cool. What's that? Nobody was I was into this stuff, man. I was obsessed. My parents will tell you that I was, it was okay because I was a social kid too. I played sports and I was in Cub Scouts. So I wasn't some introverted kid. Because even at 8 years old, I knew that you had to go out into the world if you want to meet girls. Captain Kirk boldly went. I figured if you're gonna live life the way you can live it, I'm not gonna be in space, but I could boldly go, whether it was to summer camp or whatever. You'd boldly go somewhere, and you'd meet some interesting girls, and you'd have to learn how to talk to them like Captain Kirk. That was always in the back of my mind too. But anyway, so this movie, Star Wars, I'm like, Star Wars? Clearly it was a movie there were wars in space. Now, I had seen many movies about wars in space. A lot of them were Japanese. There were a lot of, not a lot, but there were space war movies. They just weren't very good. And there was something you could immediately tell that the space effects, and there weren't that many in these commercials, but I remember thinking it looked real. Like, I didn't know how to delineate. And to be honest, I had not seen 2001: A Space Odyssey by the time I was 10. I hadn't seen it yet. And I'd seen Planet of the Apes, which changed my life. I've told that story earlier, what seeing Planet of the Apes for the first time did to me. Maybe I'll tell it again. But I hadn't seen 2001. So the effects in Star Wars were so different. Like, I'll give you an example. Whenever you watched a science fiction movie up until, and I also hadn't seen, believe it or not, I hadn't seen Forbidden Planet yet, which also had space effects that looked pretty convincing. What always bummed me out as a kid with space effects, although the Japanese could do it the best, was you'd see fire coming out of the back of rockets, and you could always tell it was like, a flame that was like this big, because it just didn't look real. I'd seen Saturn V rockets lifting up, so I knew what a rocket looked like going into space. And no science fiction film up until the time I was 10 years old convinced me that they were really in space. Like, I loved models, so I love the fact that I knew that I was watching like a model. I knew it was a model, but I liked it because I love building models. So I was like, oh man, somebody like built gigantic models, so it'd be awesome. So, but it wasn't convincing. Star Wars, this commercial, I knew right away. I was 9, seeing the commercials. I was 9 years old. My 9-year-old mind understood that whatever this Star Wars thing was, it was different. It was different. I didn't know why or how, but I knew it was different. My sci-fi addled brain could tell right away that it was different. Now, to my mind, the pinnacle of special effects, and I know people are going to laugh, but to my mind, the greatest space effects that were done that I had seen up to this point in my life were the original Star Trek TV series. In my mind, the Enterprise flying through space in Star Trek looked real to me. I didn't understand that they used blue screen photography, which, by the way, was incredibly sophisticated for the time. So all of you haters out there that talk about, the cheesy special effects in Star Trek, no, Star Trek had the greatest special effects ever. I mean, even when you go back and you watch Forbidden Planet, because the shots of the Enterprise and especially the planets in Star Trek. Like they orbit around Janus 6 from Devil in the Dark with the clouds and stuff. I mean, sure, you might see planets that didn't have clouds that were pink, or like, when you went Taste of Armageddon with Aminiar and Vendikar or whatever. But when you watch certain planet shots like Janus 6, it looked real. It looked like pictures of the Earth from space. Now, I know you're going to be like, well, what about when they do show the Earth and there were no clouds? I know. I get it. I understand. You look at when the Enterprise did find in Miri, or Tomorrow Is Yesterday. I understand. We can have that argument. But I'm just saying, in my mind, because the Enterprise traveling through space was optically printed, it had a graininess to it that gave it a reality that I was into. That's what my 9-year-old brain thought. But usually it was just, one ship traveling through space. And still, whenever you saw a planet, it was spherical. You'd be far enough back that the planet would always register as a sphere. Anyway, I see this commercial and my life changed. I'm like, I was obsessed. It was almost, I can imagine, like when Pookie in like New Jack City, Chris Rock became that crack addict in New Jack City. I'd become that guy. I was like jonesing. I had seen something that my imagination had never seen before. I was completely like, ugh, and I had to see this. And I was obsessed. Like I was a kid, like the first time I saw the dinky toy die-cast Eagle transporter, when I saw it, I think I saw it at Frederick and Nelson's, which is it's kind of like, it was a big department store, but they had a toy thing. And it was like $14 for a die-cast toy. I saw the Eagle from Space 1999. I became obsessed with it. And I'm like, oh my God, like I was jonesing to get this Eagle. And my dad's like, and I wasn't a kid who said, buy me this, buy me that, buy me that. But when I saw like an Eagle transporter, or when I saw those Mego figures for the first time, the Superman and Batman, like I had to have them. I had to have them. But the Eagle was $14. And I remember my dad going, I'm not going to buy you a $14 die-cast toy that's this big. Like, he couldn't understand. I got it for like my birthday or the holidays. I don't remember when I got it, but I finally got it because what my mom would do is when I wanted something like that, she'd go buy it and hide it in her closet and then give it to me 6 months later. I hadn't learned to snoop yet, but I learned later. But anyway, so this movie was the same way. I started talking about it. I was looking in the newspaper. I don't know if they said when it came out, because they didn't. They would just drop the commercial and they wouldn't be like coming to it. They'd say coming to a theater near you, but I don't remember the actual date. I don't know. But suddenly I started seeing this commercial, and eventually it opened on, and I wasn't aware of movie release dates. I mean, at the time, it's not like now we know, hey, movies open Friday, but you can go to the public sneak on Thursday or the public preview on Thursday. So it's really a day before. It wasn't like that. It wasn't like that back then. You just didn't know, especially a 9-year-old. How do I know? I mean, look, I still looked when we got the calendar section and the Friday paper. I would look at all the key art of movies and see which theaters they were playing at. But I didn't know when. And I'm sure this is probably like in April, because I remember life became agonizing. It just became agonizing waiting to see this movie. Like, when is it going to show up? I don't know. And somehow I find out that it's opening on May 25th. Now, this was a blow. This was a blow because I did some research. I thought it was May 25th that this happened, but it wasn't, because May 25th was a Wednesday. Star Wars was opening midweek. May 25th, 1977 was a Wednesday, which means it was a school day. And it hadn't opened in a lot of movie theaters. It was playing at the UA 150 Theater in downtown Seattle. Now, I think I was lucky. I didn't know. I knew the John Dance movie theater because I'd seen Logans Run there. So I figured that's the only movie theater. I love the John Dance. And in Bellevue, which, by the way, isn't there anymore, which is very sad. It was also the headquarters of the Sterling Recreation Organization, SRO, and they owned all the best theaters in Seattle at the time. Other than the UA 150 Theater was owned by United Artists. But anyway, so when it was going to open, I couldn't see it on a Wednesday. And I was like, I remember jonesing, like, this movie's here. Like, it's playing. It's in theaters now, and I can't see it because my parents were not going to take me to downtown Seattle during a school day. I was in 4th grade. I was in Mrs. Walton's 4th grade class at Island Park Elementary School, and I couldn't go. My dad's like, and my dad would drag me to movies. And at the time, my parents had a strict rule. My parents would take me one way to a movie if I could find someone else's parents to bring me back. So I was always calling friends of mine going, hey, You want to go see this? Like Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo. You want to go see that? And if somebody would say, yeah, I'm like, well, you think my parents will drive one way if your parents would pick up. So honestly, I was kind of mercenary in this way. I didn't care who I could get to go with me. I mean, I had good friends. I usually called them first, but I'd call anybody just to get a ride back. But this time it was downtown Seattle, and nobody ever took you to downtown Seattle. That's my dad looked it up, and it's UA 150 Theater. I don't think I'd ever been there before. I later saw, just so you know, I saw Buckaroo Banzai there. I saw Big Trouble in Little China there. I saw 9 to 5 there. I mean, I saw it was a church. Across the street was the King Cinema, where 6 months when Close Encounters opened out in 1977, it opened across the street from the UA 150 Theater at the King. So anyway, my dad agrees that he says, okay, I will take you on Saturday. So Wednesday, May 25th, you're talking Thursday, Friday, 26th, 27th. So it was Saturday, May 28th. And my dad takes me and I didn't, at this point, I didn't care. My dad tells me, because his office was downtown. He worked at the Seafirst Bank building, which was at the time the tallest building in Seattle. He was vice president of LeBeau Haynes Insurance Company. He says, I'll tell you what, I'll take you to this movie because I just want you to shut up. When I was in Indian Guides and you had to pick an Indian name, Indian Guides was a precursor to Cub Scouts. Now it's probably politically correct. I don't even know if they have Indian Guides anymore. But my dad called me Chief Running Mouth because I never shut up. So anyway, I wasn't shutting up about this movie. I talked about nothing else other than this movie, Star Wars, how I had to see it. This movie was my movie. I was convinced this movie was made for me. Somebody was making it because I considered myself the only person I knew that was in it, because I was. There was no other kid that even cared, that was remotely interested in Star Trek and sci-fi and action figures. They didn't care. So I'm begging my dad. I'm like, Dad, all day. In the morning, I talked about it. I came home from school. I talked about it. I got to see this movie. So my dad's like, okay. And the first show was probably like noon. I don't remember. My dad died in 2008, so I can't ask him. But so I bring a friend. I bring my friend Gardner Morelli. Gardner Morelli was a kid who always had a smile on his face. He was always laughing. And to this day, he's still that same guy. He's the most smiling, nicest guy. One of the nicest people I've probably ever met. It's so hilarious. So Gardner Morelli and my dad takes us to the UA 150 Theater to see Star Wars. And I can still remember, I'm getting chills thinking about, I was like, oh my God. I was literally I was like a man. I either had a demon in me or I had manufactured, my bloodstream had somehow manufactured the equivalent of crack. My imagination addiction was in full swing. So we get to the UA 150 Theater in downtown Seattle. And it was the first time I saw this golden dome. I mean, there might as well have been, Seattle's probably broken clouds, but it was an overcast day. I remember the sun was not out. It was an overcast day. But the light of God himself should have been shining on this theater. And this marquee, it had a two-tiered marquee. On the top, it would say, it said Star Wars. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Because that was the day when they would put the ad line that was on the poster. But I saw something that I had never seen before. Even when I saw Jaws, because I saw Jaws later, there was a line. So the UA 150 Theater was on the corner. And the line came out of the UA 150 Theater and wrapped around all the way around the theater. And it was like a big block. I want to say it was like a New York block, maybe not as big as it, but it was a big block. It was, and the theater was on just one corner. And there was a line stretched all the way around the theater. I had never seen this before. There was more people waiting for a movie than I didn't even know people would get in line to see a movie. I'd never seen this ever in my life. And my dad just like, well, Bobby, I guess, you won't be getting in. And I remember I wasn't a kid that like threw temper tantrums, and I was 9 years old. But I remember I had to have started crying, and it didn't compute with me because I was like, who are these people? This is my movie. This movie was made for me. Why are they here? Who are they? Why are they preventing me from getting to, only I knew about this. And I remember being totally, completely beside myself with upset. I was very, very angry. I was very mad. I didn't know what to do. I was crying my eyes out probably by this point. And my dad was like, I'm sure my dad's like freaking out, like whatever. It was one of those, I was having probably a full-on meltdown, and it was in front of my friends, so I'm trying not to, but I could not help it. It was beyond my comprehension. I didn't understand. I was probably hysterical. I was 9 years old, and this something was preventing me from seeing this movie. And my dad's like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So my dad did what any father would do. He improvised, and he said, I'll tell you what. We can come back tomorrow, and we'll come earlier. But how about I take you and Gardner to another movie right now? How's that? And he was still planning to go to his office. So there was a lot of movie theaters in Seattle. 6th and Blanchard, the UA 150 was the last movie theater in downtown. It was on the edge of downtown Seattle. So back up, there was the Music Box, there was the Town, there was the Coliseum, which was kind of like the UA 150 theater, but it was a shithole. Even though it was this big old theater, I still liked it because I saw Earthquake and Sense around there. I would later see Roller Coaster. Maybe I'd already seen if Roller Coaster was 76, maybe it was 77. I later saw Roller Coaster and Sense around there. So anyway, I remember my dad, I saw Flash Gordon there when it first opened. But I remember I saw Scanners and all. I saw a quad, a double. When Scanners opened, I saw They Came From Within, Rabid, The Brood, and Scanners at the Coliseum. So anyway, my dad passes by the Coliseum, and lo and behold, what was playing at the Coliseum Theater? A double feature. There was a double feature, The Car and Race with the Devil. I mean, come on. The Car and Race with the Devil, 2 horror movies. I'm like, a car possessed by the devil himself. I'm like, so my dad's like, calms me down, and he goes, I'll tell you what, boys, why don't I drop you off, and you can go see The Car and Race with the Devil. We were 9. So I'm like, okay, I'd calm down, and we went and saw The Car and Race with the Devil, which, by the way, turned out to be a pretty good day. Pretty good day for young Bobby Burnett. Pretty good day. The Car and Race with the Devil, loved them both. I like Race with the Devil more. I think Race with the Devil instilled in me a love of movies about crazy satanic religious cults. I love crazy satanic religious cults, especially in movies. Maybe not in real life, but if you're sacrificing virgins and you're throughout the American Southwest and everybody is secretly a cult member out to get you, which is probably why I love Rosemary's Baby so much. But this was the first time I saw Peter Fonda, Warren Oates, Loretta Swit, who I even recognized from MASH. I mean, come on, not such a bad day in the life of Bobby Burnett. It turned out, my dad turned what could have been, he was Rumpelstiltskin that day. He turned straw into gold and let Gardner Morelli and I see a double feature of The Car and Race with the Devil. Some parents would be appalled by this. I call that good parenting. So anyway, we get home, and somehow our neighbors across the street, the Chambers, and Pete, who's a year below me, and his little sister Emily, great family. I loved his mom and his dad. So somehow they tell me, or I find out, that they are going to see Star Wars tomorrow, Sunday. That would be, was it 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, May 28th. They're going to see Star Wars on Sunday. And I'm like, I remember inviting myself. I tell them a story about how there's a huge line, and they're like, why don't you come with us? Family outing. And I'm like, oh my God, can I? But then I was imploring. I remember begging them. I'm like, look, my 9-year-old self, I can't even imagine what this was like to listen to. I'm like, we got to get there like 2 hours early. You don't understand. Like, I've never seen a line. And I don't know what I was saying, but it couldn't have been good. And they're probably thinking I was going to drive myself to distraction or something. But they're like, okay, you can come with us. So we probably went down a couple hours early. We got there, and by the time we got there, we went to the first show, which I want to say it was noon. I remember it being noon. But the line was still around the corner. It wasn't huge, but it was still a big line. We parked, got in line. but I knew we would get in. I think I probably went to the front of the line and counted how many people were there because I was really worried about the movie. Like I had to see this. So we get in, and this theater was huge, and it had this domed, this great golden dome. So you looked up, and it was this wood dome, and it was split into two tiers. There wasn't really a balcony, but there was an upper part that had a little. I called it a balcony. It was amazing. I mean, being in that theater was amazing. Giant curved screen. It was incredible. I mean, what was really interesting was in my mind, I was like, wow. And the movie, I was like, this movie belongs here. This is the kind of theater this movie should play in. It was packed. I mean, the movie was packed. I mean, the excitement, you could feel it in the energy. I mean, people were bouncing up and down, and it was the first time, because I'd seen Planet of the Apes, I'd probably seen the 20th Century Fox logo many times. But it was the first time where the Fox fanfare, dun, dun, the drum rolls, da-na-na-na, da-na-na-na. And if you know your movies, the 20th Century Fox fanfare, it starts out, goes dun 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 dun, and then it goes out. Unless you're watching a widescreen movie and it has the CinemaScope, the fanfare goes on longer, and it adds the dun-na-na-na, 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 dun-dun-dun-dun. So Star Wars had that. So I remember thinking, this is the greatest movie logo in the world. It was the first time I even noticed. I mean, I love the Universal logo because it was in space, and you'd see, coming up on the Earth, the word Universal. But the 20th Century Fox logo was the first logo that I'm like, oh my God. I mean, it felt like an announcement, like this is important. And it turns out it was. So, and then, the Lucasfilm Limited comes on. And then for those of you, I mean, you have to understand, nothing like this had ever been seen before. Nothing remotely similar to it had ever been seen. Nothing. No one had seen, not just my 9-year-old. Oh, and by the way, I had turned 10. My birthday was May 15th. So this was 2 weeks, literally 2 weeks after it was 2 weeks to the day after my 10th birthday. So I was 10 years old. So I was ready for new adventures. And it was toward the end of my 4th grade year. And that would be the 76, 77. So I had seen probably Logans Run also in the same year. So I turned 10. So I was bigger. I was older. And it, I think about this now. It's so crazy to me what it was like to see the Star Wars fanfare pop on the screen with John Williams. I mean, I'm getting all I'm like teary-eyed thinking about it. You can't convey now to somebody. We all now live in a world where everyone knows Star Wars. It's like, yeah, but think to yourselves, if you're a kid whose mind was completely filled up with science fiction, fantasy, horror, that's all I dreamed about all the time. To see this for the first time, to hear the Star Wars fanfare, I'd never heard it before. The people in the theater, the only people who heard the Star Wars fanfare, I didn't even know if you could buy the soundtrack record. Who knew? I wasn't even aware that soundtrack records were a thing. When the fanfare comes on and it pops on and you see the word Star Wars in what was in my mind, the cool, I didn't even know really what a logo was. I mean, I've seen logos, but I didn't know the concept of here's a logo. Like Coca-Cola was a logo. I didn't understand, Bell Telephone. I didn't know what logos were. But then the Star Wars logo comes on the screen, exploded on the screen with this just crashing fanfare. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, and of course, as it descends back into space, and then the crawl starts. And by the way, there was no episode 4, A New Hope. It wasn't there. It was just, it is a period of civil war. Rebel spaceships striking from a hidden base have won their first victory over the evil galactic empire. And what was funny about that was everybody is reading it aloud. And I'll never. I see this plan day. The whole is like the entire theater is reading this aloud. You know, Princess Leia, custodian to the stolen. I mean, the whole thing. And it was you learn about the Death Star, the rebels. I mean, this whole scenario in 3 paragraphs is played out to you. You're like, okay, I'm here. I get it. And then what happens? You watch these words recede back into space, and you're thinking, why are we still watching those? And then the camera tilts down in that famous shot. The camera, it tilts down, and suddenly you see 2 planets or moons of Tatooine. I don't know. I'm sure that they've named them. I just don't know what they are. I'll go consult Steve Sansweet's The Star Wars Encyclopedia that I haven't out where all my books are. But anyway, at the time, you didn't know that. You didn't even know it was called Tatooine. Nobody says it. So at the beginning of the movie, so the camera pans down, and then you see something that had never been depicted in a science fiction film before, and that was you see 2 planets from a distance, and then you see a planet in the foreground. So all you see is the horizon. It's a sphere, but the way it's being portrayed, I'd never seen this in a science fiction movie before. Not like that. Maybe in Forbidden Planet when the C-570 comes close, you got the idea, but it was far enough away that it was still, when you see Altair in Forbidden Planet, but I hadn't seen Forbidden Planet then. So, but this time you saw it was depicted different. It was just different. So immediately before anything other than these planets are on screen, it was different than anything you'd seen. Then, of course, I always said Tantive, but the Tantive, Kevin Rubio once told me, whatever, whether it's the Tantive or Tantive, and nobody knew it was the Rebel Blockade Runner. You didn't know what it was called yet. Who knew? I don't even think they did. Maybe they did. I don't know. But of course, the Rebel Blockade Runner screams across the screen, being shot at, and it's firing back. And then, of course, the Star Destroyer. We didn't know it was called the Star Destroyer. It's just a giant pizza wedge in space. I mean, I'm watching this, and I was broken. Like as a kid, this was beyond my comprehension. What I was seeing, it was almost as if somebody, and just from this opening, I'm seeing spaceships depicted like I'd never seen spaceships depicted before, and it was the most. I mean, I probably wept tears of joy or something. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I just remember sitting there, and then it just went from there. You cut inside the Blockade Runner, R2 and 3PO, and I knew because I had seen pictures. I hadn't seen Fritz Lang's Metropolis, but I'd seen pictures of Maria, the Robotrix from Fritz Lang's 1927 Metropolis. And I even knew that. I'm like, oh my God, that looks like the Metropolis robot. Even my 9-year-old self knew. And R2-D2 and these troops, they set up, and look, you've all seen the movie a million times. I'm not going to describe everything I saw in Star Wars. Suffice to say, watching that movie, it was just one image after another that I was sitting there slack-jawed. I could not believe what I was seeing. There was nothing, you can't explain to people now what it was like, because now you've grown up in a world where Star Wars existed. But imagine being there when there was nothing. It wasn't just that Star Wars hadn't existed. There was nothing even remotely similar. Certainly there were in science fiction books, and I had seen pictures on the cover of many different paperbacks, and there's all kinds of burning spaceships, cities in flight, John Berkey paintings. I mean, I'd seen stuff like this. But when they're on a paperback cover, that's one thing. But when you're watching it in a movie, it was entirely a different thing. And it was so mind-blowing to me that somebody had made this. And I sat there with everybody else, and it truly was the single greatest cinema-going experience of my entire life, even to this day, because now everything you've seen since then, there have been times. I mean, I had a great time watching The Matrix. When I first saw Avengers, I couldn't believe somebody had made that movie. But there was nothing like being 9 years old and seeing something that there was not even anything remotely similar. And I already watched would watch anything. This was basically giving me. It literally was any dream I'd ever had, any fantasy or daydream or whatever my 9-year-old self had going on. This was it, man. This was somebody serving it up on a platter. This was every dream I'd ever had at 9 years old made real for me in that movie theater. And it literally changed my life. It made me, I mean, I already wanted to make movies because George Powell was already a hero of mine, the producer of War of the Worlds. And I knew who Ray Harryhausen was. And there were names I knew that, and there were people that were involved in special effects or space movies or all that. But this was on an entirely different level because not only was this the fulfillment of all of my dreams at 9, but it also was like, I was also like, how did they do this? I don't know who made this. How did it happen? And why did this happen? And I didn't, because it was like, it was stepping into a new world. The possibilities of the future were, I mean, as much as I love Star Trek, and I love Star Trek in a different way, I didn't understand the difference between science fantasy and science fiction. I mean, I love Star Trek because it was heady. You know, I enjoyed the even though I was 9, I still enjoyed the philosophy and the conversations. But this was different. This was entirely visceral. This was entirely childhood wish fulfillment. I mean, this was, all of it was it was stunning. I mean, it was crazy. To this day, I mean, I can't explain to you more. I hope that I've just conveyed what it was like to see Star Wars for the first time and where I was coming from as a kid, and it's never gone away from me, you know. And as much as people now we argue over Last Jedi or whatever. I mean, I've read this hilarious thing about Last Jedi that even I had to post on Twitter because it was so damn funny. But Star Wars will never. I hope I was able to convey to you what it was like. So this was how I saw Star Wars today on this day. Star Wars coming out 42 years ago today. I figured I would share this remembrance with you, if nothing else, to give you a little bit of insight into what a real wackadoo I am. So I don't know if you're still watching or not, but this was my experience seeing Star Wars, and maybe that's given you a little bit of insight. And it's never gone away, by the way. I mean, that feeling and what it conveyed to me at the time. And then, of course, the toys, the merchandising. But what was really interesting about Star Wars was, and I think this was really important, not only was this ingrained in me, and not only did it occupy most of my thoughts afterwards, seeing all this stuff, then in the wake of Star Wars, it directly led to things like, of course, Alien, that came out 2 years later on the same date. But it allowed for this deluge, this dam that existed because it was so financially successful. There was no stigma attached to science fiction. Science fiction was now seen, I think, for the very first time as huge business. Star Wars became the most successful film of all time. It surpassed even Jaws. And I mean, I know maybe not Gone with the Wind if you adjust for inflation and all that, but it was a big thing. And it made possible in the wake of Star Wars, we got all the Star Wars imitators, like everything from Starship Invasions to My Beloved Star Crash to the Japanese film Message from Space. And then Superman the movie. I mean, Superman the movie was probably in the works. So there was a confluence of events that were happening, but that 2-year period of time, then I got into Star Wars, and then home video exploded, and science fiction and horror. I mean, you had Halloween coming out the next year in 78, and then Phantasm and Dawn of the Dead and slasher movies and all of the things that happened. And I was at the ripe age of 10, and it all just exploded and turned me into this crazed fiend that suddenly these visions were being splashed across the big screen. It wasn't like a one-off. And more importantly, the TV special, The Making of Star Wars, was on, where I learned all about blue screen. And what was really interesting about The Making of Star Wars is it did go into cinema history, where it started showing you, I remember seeing clips, I guess, of Thief of Baghdad, or even earlier, and Mark Hamill hosted this thing. And it was really, really interesting. And the movie making and wanting to make movies was completely solidified by seeing how movies were made. I'm like, man, I want to do that. I got a Super 8 camera and started making movies with my Star Wars action figures. One day I'll have to transfer Han Solo Escapes, my sequel to The Empire Strikes Back, all made with Star Wars figures. But it cemented that I joined the Science Fiction Book Club, and it just cemented it all. It was all, my path was set. But yeah, so there you go. that was the remembrance I wanted to talk about on this day. I woke up this morning and figured I would just do a chat about this. Now, I hope you don't think I'm too insane, but there you go. And I normally have letters to read. I don't have a letter to read today. I've just got one thing that Kent Nelson, Dr. Kent Nelson, who constantly sends me DMs on Twitter that I love because he always calls me Mr. Burnett. I figure, how nice of him. And he explained that he learned that from a young age, so he keeps doing that. So yes, Dr. Nelson, you can still call me Mr. Burnett. I'm just a huge Dr. Fate fan. I love the JSA. So yes, sir. Anyway, what do you guys have to say about this? Have I pushed you all away? Have I gone off the deep end? Have I come off as too insane? Star Killer is here. He says, do you think Blade can mix in with the MCU? Yes. I do. I would love to see Blade in the MCU. I think it'd be great. But then they would have to add a supernatural element to the MCU. They'd have to bring in vampires, which is going to be interesting. Can they successfully do that? So who knows? But I think it could work. But wouldn't it be interesting? I don't know if it's weird for me to say this. This is going to seem weird for me to say, but I don't know if they could bring in the undead and vampires and the entire supernatural realm. I mean, they have Dormammu, they've got Doctor Strange, but it would be interesting to see how do they incorporate vampires into the MCU. I mean, I never thought putting Asgard, I didn't think Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America could ever work, but it did. So they would have to open up the MCU quite a bit to do that. But it'd be interesting to see if they could. I'd like to see that. That dude who is here. Hey, Jakob Fudge here. Hello, sir. Got you live here at my shop. Smile for the customers, notoriously sanctimonious RMB. Well, thanks for your letter. I hope I haven't driven them out of your shop. Like people asking you, going, who's that maniacal guy talking about when he first saw Star Wars? And it took him an hour to tell the story. Well, thanks for supporting the channel. I appreciate it. And thanks for writing in. Matt Warner says, Star Blazers was my favorite show from 3rd to the 5th grade. You got me on Yamato 2199, and it was awesome. When is part 2 of 2202 available on DVD? And what are your thoughts on Space Battleship Yamato? Matt, I love Star Blazers or Space Battleship Yamato. I love it. I love it so much that, when as I found out more, and you had the first time I ever knew about it was, of course, when Starlog was covering it. I didn't know that it predated Star Wars, that Space Battleship Yamato debuted in Japan in 1974, I think it was 74. It might be 73. I think it was 74. But I didn't know that. And of course, I loved Star Blazers. I didn't know the American version had a lot edited out, but I'm glad you caught up. I mean, I thought 2199 was one of the greatest, we'll call it a reboot or a remake or whatever, but it took 5 years for them to finish it all up, but it's incredible. 2202 is amazing. I haven't built any yet, but I still have my 1/350th scale Yamato in the garage. I got to build that. I got it at Comic-Con like 10 years ago. I think I'm going to build it this year. But I love it so much. And the remake is incredible. Although I do have to get the movie. I got to get the Blu-ray of the Space Ark movie. I love it so much. I'm a huge fan. And I think if you guys have not watched, if you want to watch great anime, you've got to watch Star Blazers 2199. And it's available on Blu-ray. I think it's probably streaming somewhere. It's incredible. It's an incredible story. And again, I saw it on the heels of Star Wars. So it's great. Horace Austin says, the great man Horace Austin, who is if you don't know Horace Austin and know him is to love him. He's a great man, a good friend. And what do you mean, Horace? I gave Alien the love. 40 years old today. I gave it the love. What's up? J Meister 25 says, is the MCU this generation Star Wars or better? You know what? I don't think it is this generation Star Wars or better. I think it's different because we'd seen superhero films before. There'd been a lot of good ones. Raimi's, first of all, Superman the movie, Tim Burton's movies, the X-Men movies, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies. But I think the MCU as an ongoing film franchise is something new. And I think for me, it's certainly something new. And even as a middle-aged guy, maybe even beyond middle age with one foot in the grave, it is a monumental achievement. The fact that it's gone on for 11 years and continues to go on is pretty astonishing. I think it's different. I don't think that there can ever be necessarily anything like Star Wars was, because there had been nothing remotely similar to Star Wars. I think, and now I've asked people. I was speaking to a high school class yesterday, but when I've spoken to high school and college courses, I frequently ask people, what was something that you saw that you'd never seen before? And a lot of younger audiences will cite Jurassic Park, or they'll cite The Matrix because of the effects technology. And when they were younger, they were the first, and I get it. But Star Wars was such a leap. Now, I say this as somebody who did not see 2001 and Planet of the Apes or Forbidden Planet. I had not seen 2001 in a theater, so I did not have that mind-blowing experience. But 2001 is a very different movie. It strived for realism, and it strived to be like that, where Star Wars was science fantasy, and it combined Kurosawa movies, and it combined World War II movies, and it combined fantasy epic. There's a lot of Tolkien in Star Wars. Of course, I didn't know what that Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey was. I didn't know any of that stuff. But I think Star Wars was such a demarcation. I do, however, think that eventually we will see, probably in the next 10 years, I think there's going to be a virtual reality experience, and I don't know what that's going to be. But when virtual reality gets to a point where gaming and VR becomes so immersive that whatever that first immersive experience is, and the thing is, it's going to be, right now, the gaming technology is incrementally increasing, but we're seeing it incrementally increase before our eyes. But I do think at some point there's going to be a monumental leap in VR technology, and that's going to be the equivalent of what it was like seeing Star Wars 42 years ago for the first time. Because now, post-Star Wars, you've watched this progression. We've never had, Star Wars was a leap. We were here, and Star Wars jumped. If you look at Logan's Run, the effects technology, you still see wires during the carousel sequences, or when the cleanup guys are flying to clean up the dead bodies, or even, as much as I enjoy the opening long lingering shots of the Dome City, both exterior and interiors in Logan's Run, that won the Academy Award for Best Special Effects, and it looks like it was made 30 years before. As much as my beloved Logan's Run should not be criticized, I'm criticizing it. So it's interesting. It's an interesting, but I could be wrong. It may be that someone else's experience. This is a generational thing. That's why I say, for us, the OGs, that's why it really inspired such a generation of filmmakers and artists, because it was such a major leap. We were watching science fiction, and it was kind of a stew of things, and nothing was remotely similar to Star Wars. And because it felt so gigantic and monumental. But I do think the MCU is very significant, because there hadn't been anything like that before. But again, I could be wrong, because this is my experience, and if I'm sure much younger audiences have theirs. So yeah, so you never know. I think it's probably not for me to say. Willow Yang is here. Willow Yang says, is that Godzilla next to your Gundam mug? I really hope King of the Monsters has a bigger opening than the 50 million it was tracking for. Well, Willow, yes. As a matter of fact, this Godzilla plushie, it was in the gift bag they gave out at the screening of Godzilla that I was at. There's people on my Godzilla. By the way, my Godzilla thoughts is easily the most watched video I've done. Like 65,000 people watched it. And there are people saying I was either bragging or I didn't really see it. I was making it up, which I thought was pretty damn funny. But yes, it's a Godzilla plushie that was in my bag, which was great. They actually gave out, let's see, it was, I don't know where I put them. They actually gave out Godzilla Pop Rocks in that bag too, which I thought was kind of funny. Alexander Wilson says, I first saw Free Enterprise on HBO when I was 13 in 2001. I was like, why is Will cussing? What is going on? I love the movie. What's the biggest lesson you learned from making it? That's interesting. Well, you know what, Alexander? On June 4th, which is next week? 2 weeks. June 4th is the 20th anniversary of the theatrical release of Free Enterprise. It opened in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. And I'm going to do a whole show about Free Enterprise's 20th anniversary and what it meant. But I think the biggest lesson that I learned making Free Enterprise moving forward is how much more preparation I needed to make. One of the things about Free Enterprise, it really was fly by the seat of our pants because we had so many locations rained out. I had tried storyboarding sequences. I had lost those locations on the day. The whole end of the movie that was a beach party and we couldn't go to the beach because of El Nino. The state of California closed the beaches. I would have done more preparation. And I also would have followed, because it was a collective effort, I didn't exude as much authority as I probably should have, because I didn't have, well, the ego yet to make Free Enterprise the way I wanted to make it. And plus, it was really a collective effort with me and Mark. We had gone into it together. But when you're directing a movie, you're directing a movie. And I remember the first day, the first sequence we were shooting was the Cartoonsville sequence. And I was block shooting it. Before we turned around, I was getting all the angles, and everybody thought that I was wrong, where they're like, "No, Rob, you're mistaken." Well, it turned out I wasn't mistaken. And I was very careful about the kind of coverage I got, and we were in there for like 3 hours. A lot of the locations on Free Enterprise, we were in there. We had like 40 locations in 20 days. It was a nightmare. I'd never do that again. Never do that again. I learned so many lessons on Free Enterprise, but I remember that first day, the first half day, people were throwing me off, saying I didn't know what I'd made a mistake about how I wanted to block shoot. I hadn't made a mistake. They had made a mistake. They weren't getting what I was doing. And you need to, as a director, I think the biggest things that I learned was only you know what's in your head. So you can't expect others to know what's in your head unless you convey that information to your department heads. And one of the great things about working on movies that I have learned, mostly covering other people making movies, is that as the director, your entire crew and cast wants to please you. They're trying to fulfill what it is that you have in your head. And the only way that they can do that is if you convey what's in your head. So you must be very communicative to all of your department heads. And I do a thing now, what I call walking the day. So whenever I'm working on something as a director or even as a producer, I'll do this with the director, is I will take the first AD, the cinematographer, and if it's myself directing, and I will walk our entire day. And I will basically give the broad strokes of what I want to shoot, the coverage I want to shoot for that day. So that way, the first AD understands exactly where the day is going to go, because the first AD runs your set and makes sure you're going to make your days. So you got to make sure that the first AD, more than anyone else, needs to know what's in your head. Your cinematographer also needs to know, because they need to anticipate where they tell the camera department. The camera department is always working ahead of you. Like, where's the next setup? How quickly can we get the camera and lights into position? What is the best way that we can shoot this coverage? Do we need a second camera? If we don't have a second camera, do we need to block shoot in one direction and then spin around? How can we do all that? But it's very important to be communicative with all your departments. Costumes, hair and makeup, special effects, if there's anything going on set. But that's, I think, what I learned it over the course. And I'll tell you something else. William Shatner told me a very important lesson. The first day that we were shooting with William Shatner, we were in front of the El Rey Theater on Wilshire Boulevard. By the way, if you're shooting a low-budget independent movie, the last place you should be shooting is on Wilshire Boulevard on a sidewalk. Crazy. It still turned out okay. But what an insane... And so Chuck Barbie, my DP, even though he's a grizzled veteran, he did a great job, but he was nervous. I was nervous. I'm working with Shatner. And we brought Shatner out on set to block the scene so they could get camera marks and all that. But once we got there, once Shatner was on set, Chuck had to tweak the lights. And it was Shatner's first scene. Shatner took me aside very calmly, took me away from everybody else, and he explained in a very stern, fatherly, but very nice voice. He said, "You know, Rob, when you call me to the set, this is our time to work. And I don't want lights being tweaked or anything. if we're not blocking, we're ready to shoot, and you call me to the set, I want to be able to shoot. I don't want futzing around to happen because this is now our time. He was absolutely right. Absolutely right. And this is a lesson specifically about actors, but it's something I think about all the time. Hopefully I can direct another feature film. I'm working on something that it's going to be a long road, and hopefully you will all be participants in this one, but because I have an idea for that. And no, it's not crowdfunding. Uh, uh, I know a lot more, especially I went from doing free enterprise to going into the DVD world, where suddenly I'd made an independent movie. And then 2 years later, I'm on the set of $150 million epic films being made, whether it was Chronicles of Narnia, whether it was Lord of the Rings, whether it was Superman Returns and the X-Men films. I got to watch, basically I went back to film school and watched how these movies were made. And if somebody, honestly, if you want me to be an egomaniac, if someone gave me $200 million and said, Rob, you have to go direct a tentpole movie, you have 4 weeks to prep, I'd say, I can do it. I mean, I spent 15 years covering these movies. I was on set, embedded in productions. I produced a film in Bulgaria where I was on set producing this film, watched my friend Dave Parker direct. But the biggest lesson I learned in terms of dealing with actors is never call an actor to set, to shoot, and futz. Never waste their time. So that's a really good question, actually, Alexander Wilson. Thank you. Star Killer says, I'm excited for the live-action Gundam Wing movie. First of all, is it a live-action Gundam Wing movie? I thought it was a live-action Gundam movie because I'm all about the Universal Century. And I have not seen Gundam Origin because I'm not caught up. I think Gundam Seed, was it Gundam Zero? I don't even remember the last, the Riser, whatever it was, what Gundam show had the Riser? I don't remember. That was the last one I watched, but even that wasn't part of the Universal Century. No, it was Unicorn Gundam because that was UC. My favorite Gundam, I'm all about the Universal Century. I love Gundam Unicorn. If you guys are not Gundam fans, you haven't gotten into Gundam Unicorn is awesome. But Gundam Origin suddenly is popping up in my YouTube feed, and I watched an episode of it. It's great. I got to go back now. I got to go get all the Blu-rays and watch Gundam Origin now. But because I like Char, I like the portrayal of Char in Gundam Origin. But my favorite anime of all time, as I've said many times on this show, is Legends of the Galactic Heroes. And I know everyone's like, huh? Legends of the Galactic Heroes, the original OAV, I think it's 110 episodes, is by far my favorite Japanese animated show. It's a giant epic space opera. It's 110 episodes, and it is amazing. They've done a reboot this year. Last year, they remade it. I did buy the first season of the reboot that came out, but I haven't watched it yet. I have that in the Mazinga Zeto movie to watch. That Legends of the Galactic Heroes is by far my favorite anime of all time. But some other ones that I really like, I mean, it's Legends of the Galactic Heroes and Space Battleship Yamato. But I love Gundam. I love Area 88. I'm kind of old school. You know, I like old school anime. I'm a 70s, 80s anime kid. I do like the Go Nagai Super Robot shows. Like, I love Getter Robo, and I love Getter Robo G, Getter Robo Armageddon. I like Vampire Hunter D. And then there's a lot of Saint Seiya. All the weird. I watch a lot of anime, but usually I like science fiction, space, and I like Ghost in the Shell. You know, but yeah, those are along those lines. If that is an acceptable. But that doesn't mean I don't enjoy like new anime stuff, because I do. Look, I love my hentai. I like Bible Black, but don't tell anybody, because then I'll just look like the dirty old man that I am. Let's see. Do you have the Revenge of the Sith Obi-Wan hot? That dude says, you're going to like this question. You're going to like this answer. That dude says, do you have the Revenge of the Sith Obi-Wan hot toy ordered? Thoughts on the head sculpt controversy in the 1/6 community? Mine shipped yesterday. Well, that dude, you're in luck. All right. I have an answer. Actually, I don't have an answer for you, but I'm going to get an answer for you. Here is the 1/6 scale deluxe version of the Revenge of the Sith Obi-Wan Kenobi figure. This was a birthday present to me. And why don't we open it together? So this Star Wars Remembrance has now turned into an unboxing. Let's do it together. And we'll weigh in on the controversy, because I didn't know that there was a controversy. Here we go. This is the Hot Toy Revenge of the Sith Obi-Wan Kenobi Hot Toy figure. This is the deluxe version. I was very excited about this. So here it is. So there you go, that dude. Let's open this up, and we can all join in on this controversy. Man, I'll tell you, I had high hopes for this figure. So here we go. It even comes with baby Anakin, right? Oh no, this is baby Luke. Baby Luke. Wow, this has a lot of stuff in it. This is pretty dope. So I'm not gonna open up the whole thing, but since you asked, we might as well weigh in on the head sculpt controversy. And by the way, I have to say, I don't even know what the head sculpt controversy is, to be honest. So because I haven't been keeping up, but I'm going to open this up now. I know collectors are probably going, oh my God. So, okay, I'm going to take the figure out. Here is the figure. Well, I don't know what the controversy is. I'm going to hold this up. Here is the headshot of, I hope it's, can you see it? Is it lit enough? Let's get closer. Take a gander at his head sculpt. Probably not focused on me. I don't know. I think that looks pretty damn good. Look at this figure, man. This figure is just unbelievable. Yeah, so there you go. I don't know what the head sculpting thing is, but I'm sure somebody will tell me. I don't know. I have no idea. But there you go, everyone. I've just unboxed a Hot Toy figure on the air, a birthday present that I hadn't even cracked open. It was sitting here, did not crack open, and now I have. Oh, did I put this on right? Or for some reason, it's not. It's not going down. I don't know why. Well, listen. So there you go. There's me opening a Hot Toy figure on the air, and I don't know why I can't. Oh, things are falling apart. So I'll tell you what. I'm just going to put this over here, and I'll put it back when we finish this chat. I don't want to lose any pieces, but I was waiting for this figure because it looks great, and there you go. So, so there you go, that dude. Alexander Wilson. What is the controversy? There's always a controversy. Alexander Wilson says, when Free Enterprise came on, I thought it was Will and Grace. I was like, Will, Grace is not going to like your potty mouth. Laugh out loud. How naive I was. Well, Alexander, once again, thanks for supporting the channel. I very much appreciate it. You know, there's a lot of cussing in Free Enterprise, and it's also not very woke, as far as certain as apparently by the story that I told the other day about what happened at the USA Film Festival. So anyway, Travis Rayner says, by the way, that dude, you know what's a bummer is to be honest, you know, I haven't been able to keep up with Star Wars Hot Toys figures as much, and the reason being is I don't have Star Wars Hot Toy figures that I can resell. Because one of the great things about the superhero Hot Toy figures is that a new iteration comes out, and then I can sell the old one, because I only like to have like one iteration of a figure. And with the Star Wars figures, I don't have older versions of them. They haven't released multiple versions, so I'm really behind on Star Wars figures. But I was asked by somebody near and dear to me if I wanted a Hot Toy figure for my birthday, and I said, well, actually, I really do want the Revenge of the Sith figure, the Obi-Wan Kenobi, so I got it. But I don't, here's the thing, I don't have the Anakin figure that goes with it, and I really want to get the Sideshow exclusive Hot Toy of the dark Anakin, the you know, when he turns dark, so they can fight, so I can do a display. But yeah, that's why I'm way behind on the Star Wars Hot Toys figures. That's why I need to get another movie project off the ground, because I feel like I need like $10,000 of disposable income so I can pay back some people I owe money to, and then I can buy the remaining Star Wars figures that I need for my collection. Anyway, Travis Rayner says, Well, actually, wait, Alexander, let me finish by saying, yes, I really want to get my hands on the negative. It's going to cost, people have asked me about doing a 20th anniversary version of Free Enterprise. I would love to. I really want to. I don't own the film. The executive producer owns the film, but to do a proper 4K version, and the version that I would want to do of Free Enterprise to do the transfer, it'd probably be about $150,000 just to transfer the negative and create. I want to do a third version of Free Enterprise and really do sort of the final cut version. We're getting the final cut of The Doors. The final cut of Blade Runner came out. Just do a Free Enterprise final cut, because there's a lot of things now, and I wouldn't go back and change much, but I would just make the movie better, because it's kind of a forgotten film in a way. It doesn't exist in HD, and I would really like to go back and do a new transfer of the movie. And I'm working on perhaps raising money to do that, but I'd have to talk to the rights holder and the man who owns the film, Mark Gottwald, the executive producer who originally paid for it, which I think would be great. And I know that Mark Altman and I would love to see a new version come out and do a definitive version of the film. Travis Rayner says, have you seen the Star Wars Scene 38 reimagined Darth Vader as Obi-Wan on YouTube? It was crazy good. Well, I thought it was really well done, Travis. I thought it was really well done. However, I don't think it fit with the movie. I think it was an interesting idea on its own. And if you want to see something that comments on it, the Auralnauts, A-U-R-A-L, the Auralnauts, they made a video about it, about Star Wars Scene 38, 42, whatever. It dropped today, or they dropped it yesterday on YouTube. These guys are canny dudes. I wish I could meet them, see what they did. They did a response video that's pretty genius. And I recommend you guys all checking that out. But I thought what they did was pretty impressive. But the problem is that scene was never supposed to be about some, kick-ass lightsaber duel. It's about something else. And I think that kick-ass lightsaber duel on its own is pretty kick-ass, and they did a good job. But in the context of the movie Star Wars, I don't think it was really about that. And I don't think a lightsaber duel would have added to the film necessarily, but it was well done. But here's what I also didn't like about it. Thematically, I don't think it worked. I also didn't like the camera work. Star Wars is really a beautifully shot, very well composed movie. And the kind of camera work that they utilized, and I understand they needed it to sort of cover up any effects deficiencies. But it's a very impressive piece of work, don't get me wrong. But it didn't work for me. Like, I would not want to see a version of Star Wars with that inserted into it, because I don't think it works very well as far as within context of the rest of the movie. As a piece unto itself, I thought it was pretty impressive and certainly fun to watch. Mark D says, I saw Star Wars at the theater in 1977 when I was 7. That was the first time I felt the magic of movies, and I was changed forever. Absolutely. Rob, will we ever get a Rick Deckard or Roy Batty hot toy figure? Well, Mark D, I'm glad you feel the same way about Star Wars as I do. And that's a really good question about Rick Deckard and Roy Batty. I know for a long time, like when Blade Runner first came out, there was very few licensed toys. There was a line of die-cast metal cars and the spinners, but they actually they committed the cardinal sin. They had the logo Blade Runner printed on the cars. I mean, I could get into this, and Kent Nelson sent me a letter, which I'm going to read later, because why not? About toys and geek culture, and I could get into it. I've gone on these rants before. Maybe since somebody asked me about hot toy figures, I will go off on a rant, because Dr. Kent Nelson did send me a great letter, and since it refers to your question, I just don't think that anybody thinks there's enough money in doing. Remember, Blade Runner is it's a niche thing. Now, what you need is like 3A. You need a toy company that's a niche toy company. I mean, NECA did Blade Runner 2049 figures, did they not? But they didn't do 12-inch. I've got a pretty good bootleg Rick Deckard 12-inch that I've had for years. And I've got a bootleg Roy Batty figure. And as bootleg figures become better and better, some of them even rival Hot Toys figures, I think that we might see one. I just don't see a company, though, like Hot Toys. I was surprised, for instance, Hot Toys will do a figure like Eric Draven from The Crow. It didn't sell out right away. Even Jake Sully from Avatar, which is a pretty cool figure for Hot Toys to make. Those things don't sell as well. I just don't see a company risking, unless you had a company that would do pre-orders and they would base how many books they're printing, or how many books they're printing, how many toys they're making based on their pre-orders. If somebody would do a pre-order, maybe, but I just don't see Hot Toys doing that unless I think I always thought that Hot Toys should start like a premium collectors club. Like they would do a line of licensed figures. Like, for instance, I'd like to get the entire Nostromo crew. They've done Ripley from Alien, but who would buy Parker, you know, and who would buy John Hurt, you know, who would buy unless he had exploding chest action. I mean, I want a Yaphet Kotto figure from Alien, and I want the whole Nostromo crew. I want Captain Dallas, you know, but who's going to make those? And not only that, who's going to buy them? They have to know. Hot Toys knows their Marvel figures sell, but even not all of their Marvel figures sell. Some of them sell a lot more than others. I mean, I pre-ordered Shuri. I don't know how many people are going to buy Shuri, but I thought it was really cool to get a female Hot Toy figure, Shuri from Black Panther. It's a kick-ass figure. I hope it sells. I hope the Rescue figure they just put up for pre-order, Pepper Potts from Endgame, I hope that figure sells. I know the Pepper Potts figure, when she comes with the 2-pack with her in the Iron Man armor, you can still get that. A lot of so I just don't think that they would spend the money on the Blade Runner figures as much as I want them. Hell, I would love to get the Warriors, all the Warriors, and I mean, 1/12 is going to do that. And there's so many. I'd love to get Logans Run figures. I don't know. I mean, look at how long it takes QMX to put great Star Trek 12-inch figures out. I mean, they put out Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. I hear they're doing new head sculpts for Kirk and Spock, but how long is it going to take to get Sulu and Scotty out? I don't know. It's tough, but I would like to see them. I would like to see them like you. I think that would be great, because why not? Who wouldn't want to see those figures? That dude says, okay, you deserve more money for opening that on camera for me. Who needs hentai with content like this? That dude, you are my dude. The controversy was the released product versus the prototype. Well, I mean, you know, I honestly, it's a little dim in here. I've got my lighting on for these choices. I don't know. I mean, the prototype looked pretty damn good to me. You know, it's funny because as a rule, I'm much more interested in the original trilogy stuff. To be honest, I haven't bought any Hot Toys figures from the new trilogy, from Force Awakens on. Now, and if you go to like Big Bad Toy Store, you can still get like their Stormtrooper 2-packs at retail, but they'll give you $100 in store credit. That's why if I had like extra money to spend, I'd buy all that stuff and get the store credit, because some of them, like even old Han Solo and Chewbacca from Force Awakens, the 2-pack of the old Han Solo and Chewbacca, they'll give you like $200 in store credit. Sure, you have to buy $500 the 2-pack first, but they're not selling as well. But I do love the original series stuff when I can, you know, if I have any money, afford it. But yeah, I mean, I think it looks pretty good. But again, I've just given this cursory glance. The package looks great. I mean, there's been some great stuff. I mean, Hot Toys look, they can't get Harrison Ford's face right. They can't get it down. I mean, their Raiders of the Lost Ark figure is still, I think, one of the great disappointing Hot Toys figures. Although it's still pretty good. I mean, I still prefer the Toys McCoy figure, but that's just me. And I have not got, over the last 3 or 4 years, I've not kept up with my 12-inch figures the way I would like to have. I've traded in, you know, I'll resell some to get money to buy new ones, but I haven't had enough. Working on this independent film has not made me rich. I probably need like 20 grand to buy all the Hot Toys figures I want. I don't even have the DeLorean. I think the last big expenditure I made was the Batmobile from Tim Burton's 89 Batman, which, by the way, kicks ass. But where can I put it? So yeah, I don't know about the head sculpt controversy. I know there's always people bitching and moaning, but for the most part, I do love Hot Toys. I mean, you know, they usually can do no wrong. But I'll have to get back to you on that. But yeah, there's always a controversy. It's hard. Like for what we're getting, I mean, it's amazing what we do get. But yes, it's always disappointing. I mean, I know that the first prototype of the Steve Rogers, the Captain America from Endgame, and then they've released a new picture of a head sculpt or something. it looked pretty good, but we'll see. I mean, people are always bitching, which, by the way, I love. I love jumping into the fray and reading all the commentaries, and I love watching guys like Justin's Collection, or of course you have to Budget Stark. If you guys want to know about Hot Toys, there's a YouTube channel, Budget Stark. I think it's Mark. Is it Mark his name? Budget Stark. He lives in Hong Kong. The guy, if you like Hot Toys, you like action figures, you got to watch Budget Stark's YouTube channel. And you also have to watch or look up Justin's Collection. I think he's probably in Australia. I don't know where Justin is, but Justin's Collection is another guy I watch. I obsessively watch people's Hot Toys collection videos because if I had a room, I used to have an old office with a great display case, but I don't really have a. You'll see when I'm going to do this tonight. I'm going to flip around so you'll finally see my Hot Toys collection. But my old cases, the lighting it's not working, so I have to get those new. I have to get new LEDs. But anyway, I digress. People are like, what are you talking about? So that dude, you were my dude. Thanks for the extra super chat. I will put it toward a pre-order. Tony Reyes says, my fiance and I are watching the 4K restoration of Alien in theaters tomorrow. I'm super excited. Alien is my favorite film of all time. Well, Tony Reyes, has your fiance seen Alien? I think, you know what? The real power of Alien is to see it big on the big screen. Look, even if you have a great TV, it's still great. But man, one of the most awesome things in a theater, still to this day, one of my favorite things is at the end of Alien. Spoiler alert for people who've never seen Alien. When the Nostromo self-destruct is activated and it's the strobing light, when there's the famous shot in her face where she turns after she gets Jones and there's the alien. That strobing effect in a movie theater, it kicks ass. It kicks ass. So I would love to be seeing that. The new restoration looks fantastic. It's amazing. It's amazing. Culture Inject asks, what's an art director's job in TV and why do some shows have more than one? Do FX departments get to start work on a show before cameras start rolling? If you're just talking about, I'll talk about TV and movies. First of all, an art director works under the auspices of the production designer, usually. But an art director is more in charge of, like, a production designer will, say, design a set, right? And a production designer is in charge of the overall sets. But an art director is basically the person who fills those sets up. Really, I mean, in a nutshell, that's kind of what it is. So you might have, and by the way, that doesn't mean a production designer doesn't. They always work hand in hand. But an art director is more about the minutia and things like that. But they do, they work hand in hand with the production designer. And, there are different art directors that can specialize in different things depending on what kind of a show you have. So it really depends. But in a nutshell, that's kind of, I think that's the best way to explain it. And do FX departments get to start work on a show before cameras start rolling? Well, on large budget movies, they certainly start. I mean, now we have effect sequences that are usually prevised months, if not sometimes even years, before a movie, the cameras actually start rolling because it takes so long to realize those effect sequences. And now the reason why, and again, storyboards have been in use since the beginning of motion pictures were made, really. But when it came to expensive visual effect shots, especially when you're combining live action photography and special effects, whether it's CGI, whether it's model photography, miniatures and models, you have to previs the sequences beforehand, before you start shooting. So when you get to set, you know what pieces that you need for the visual effect shots. So yes, frequently now, FX shots. Now for television, they do that, but television has a much more compressed schedule. And a lot of the time they don't have the prep work that goes into a feature film, because television schedule, they just don't have that kind of luxury usually. So a television schedule, a lot of times VFX work is not shot beforehand because it's really reliant on what they're getting. But it can. But on feature films, VFX work, especially today, absolutely begins before the cameras start rolling. Absolutely, 100%. And sometimes, as I said, months, even years before. So good question, actually. Good question. The Victory Unlimited show is here. I have to say, I love saying that. Victory Unlimited, thank you for your support of this channel. What movie from the past had such a clever opening that it had you hooked from the beginning? For me, it was Raiders of the Lost Ark when the Paramount logo became part of the opening scene. Yeah, you know what? That was fantastic. That's a good one. I mean, God, I can't really think of something right off the top of my head that's like that. As soon as I get off this chat, I'll be like, oh yeah, I'll remember. I love those openings, and I love how, like in Temple of Doom, it went from the Paramount Mountain to the Gong, the mountain on the Gong. Unfortunately, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull ends up going to what, a molehill, or that's kind of weird. God, I don't know. I can't really think. There have been times, like I remember Waterworld, for instance. I loved what they did with the Universal logo. They've done a lot of clever things with the Universal logo. Same the Paramount logo too, but when you see the Universal logo at the beginning of Waterworld happens, and you see the world gets drowned, that was cool. But I love when people do that with the logos. Whenever somebody does something with logos, the Warner Brothers logo in front of Godzilla King of the Monsters has something pretty cool. But I love when they do that. I just can't think of anything. Didn't Edward Scissorhands like have snow in front of the 20th Century Fox logo? I just love the fact, because that's just an extra added detail that the filmmakers are putting in. Like I loved in was it X2 when they add at the end of the 20th Century Fox logo, John Ottman puts a little bit of the theme and the X in Fox. They let it linger on the screen before it dissolved back. That might have been on X-Men 1 as well. I just can't remember right off the top of my head, but I think it was in X-Men 2 they first did that. I love when people do that. But yeah, I don't remember what the first one I ever saw was. I'm sure somebody has done. Now I've got to go do a Google search when people have manipulated times when people have manipulated the opening logos from studios to do that. Well, okay, I'm going to read this. I'm going to read this letter because it goes along with today's subject matter, even though we're approaching the 2-hour mark. This comes from Kent Nelson, who has been a supporter and watcher of this channel. He contacts me through Twitter and always calls me Mr. Burnett, which I appreciate. That's very nice of you, Kent. Kent says, and this is, I think, a really great topic, and now it goes along. Since we're talking hot toys, I'm going to read this. Kent Nelson says, do you think that technology meets geek culture, or a topic title that you'd no doubt word better, would make an interesting chat topic? You could look at everything from the original Kenner-made Star Wars vehicle toys that include buttons that make actual Star Wars sound effects. That had to be the first time that had been done, right? Maybe an earlier Star Trek toy or a Godzilla figure that roared. Prop replicas such as Trek phasers, communicators, and tricorders, or green, yellow, and red lanterns, 1-to-1 scale power batteries that light up when you place a ring in the charging position. The life-size Han all the way up to and including the BB-8 and First Order Stormtrooper robot that can be controlled with an app. And of course, let's not forget the Chewbacca mask that roars. Rest in peace, Peter Mayhew. You can have Mr. Gregory Smith on it as a subject matter expert who can talk about how the advances in tech made these projects even possible. Well, Kent, I could make that the subject of a whole show, but I wanted to. I put your topic aside here because I wanted to read it and address it because I think it has a lot of interesting things. And since I talked about seeing Star Wars for the first time, I think this, and we just opened a new Star Wars toy, I think it's pretty relevant to talk about now. Now, here's the funny thing. As a kid, as I talked about earlier in this chat, I loved G.I. Joe figures. And the first time I started collecting licensed toys was the Mego World's Greatest Superhero figures, the 8-inch tall Mego cloth uniform superhero figures. Now, even as a kid, I want to say I was probably, I don't know when the first Mego came out, in 74 maybe. The first Mego toys I bought were, as I said, the Superman and Batman. Now, even as a kid, the Batman came with these basically mitten gloves that I hated. I'm like, they were stupid, but they were kids for toys. And then also the logos, the sticker logos on the front. Like, I don't know how they could have done it any better at the time, but the costumes, everything looked kid friendly. And when I was watching shows, Like when you read a comic book, for instance, you imagine, I did not imagine that if these characters were translated into the real world, that they would look exactly like they looked in the comic. Even my young mind would be like, no, they would have to have something, they'd have to have the equivalent of this in the real world, because nothing in the real world looked the way it did in the comic book. Four color fantasies, right? So I used to hate, even as a kid, I would get licensed toys that looked like they looked in a comic book as opposed to a translation into a real world version. And when we started getting Star Wars action figures, it was the same thing. The Star Wars action figures that you would get, the little 3 3/4 action figures, didn't look like the equivalent of real people. They looked like a toy version of the characters, which in my mind, it was all I was getting, so I went with it. But I hated it. Even as a 10-year-old kid, I'm buying these Star Wars figures, and I'm like, why can't they look like the whole thing about Star Wars was it was this lived-in, weathered universe. And I've told this story before, but I'm going to tell it again. The first Star Wars vehicle that I ever got, the toy vehicle I ever got, was the Land Speeder. It was the Kenner Land Speeder. Didn't look like the Land Speeder in the movie. The windshield was too tall. It wasn't long enough. It wasn't weathered. It didn't look like the Land Speeder from the movie, but I was supposed to be excited about it because they admittedly had a clever action feature, was in that they had wheels that would pop down that you could retract and pop down that were spring-loaded to simulate floating. That's cool, but as a kid, all I wanted was a ship. I wanted the Land Speeder to look like it looked in the movie. And I was like, why can't you do that? Now, this was a problem for toys. Dinky Toys, my beloved Dinky Toys out of England, when they made, for instance, the Thunderbird 2 from the Thunderbirds, or they made the Interceptor from UFO, or they made the Eagle Transporter from Space 1999, they would be molded in blue or green. They were not molded in the color they were on the show. When you bought the Interceptor, you know, the Dinky Interceptor that I love so much, or the Shadow Mobile looked correct. That was the only one that, it's molded in like camouflage green. Okay, we're rocking and rolling now. But I never understood, why did they give stupid looking shit to kids to play with? And as a kid, I'm like, what, do you think I'm dumb? Why am I buying an Interceptor, a Dinky Interceptor that was really expensive for a toy because it was die-cast metal? Why is it green? Why is it green? Because the Interceptors on UFO were like white with red markings. Why? What was that so hard? Why am I buying a toy that doesn't look like the toy, look like it did in the show? Like, why would you make a toy because they had to make it more colorful for kids? I always felt insulted, even as an 8-year-old or whenever I was getting these things. I'm like, how hard? Like, why? Like, this was a great question in my childhood. Like, why are you making me a toy that I really want? I really want this toy, but why does it have to look? Why does it have to be green? There was never a green Eagle Transporter on Space 1999. I love the Eagle. To this day, I love the Eagle. I've got an unbuilt model that I'm going to build right back there. I've got an Eagle right behind me. I've loved the Eagle my whole life. Now you can get Eagles that look right. You go to, what is it, 1612 now, and they're making 44-inch. They all sold out, but they're making, I didn't get one. They're making 44-inch studio scale Eagles. They're 2,500 pounds, but I mean, they're like this big. I'd buy one. Who's got that kind of money? But anyway, it used to just bug the hell out of me. And all I wanted was a toy that in my mind's eye, like, I didn't need sound effects features. Like, I understand the first time I remember getting a sound effects feature, there was a 12-inch G.I. Joe vehicle, and it was like their ATV vehicle, but it was red, and it came with the computer thing in the back, and you press different buttons, and it had different sound effects. But it was like, okay, I get it. And the sound effects, you hit a button and somebody would be like, Joe, come quick, I need help. That's what it would say. But it would only have one phrase, or now we get like 3 or 4 or 5 phrases. But I mean, it would limit you into what kind of an adventure. You'd have to work out some adventure where you could hit the button and have somebody say that phrase. I always thought that was lame. I mean, I get it. They wanted to have playability. Like, this toy had to have some kind of playability. But adding this technology to these toys, I always thought the technology was lame because no matter what they did, whether it was a floating land speeder or whether they gave you talking noises, or the only thing that I thought was welcome at all in my mind is if they put sound effects from the movies, like the screaming sound of the twin ion engines in a TIE fighter, which they made. The first TIE fighter that came out from, it was the last, you had the land speeder and the X-Wing. The third toy to come out that took forever was the TIE fighter. And I've told this story before on the show. What a freaking disappointment that was. Very, very disappointing. Very disappointing because the wings were too far apart. It was molded in white instead of that cool blue-gray. Why were the wings too small? And the big feature they gave you was, oh, you could pop the wings off and to simulate an explosion. And they were so heavy, they'd pop off and fall to the ground. Even that feature looked stupid. And I never used it. And then it came with a sound effect. You'd hit the button and it'd have a light up thing, and it made this whining noise, which is all they could do. They couldn't sample a sound and put it in. It was terrible. It didn't sound like a twin ion engine. So you're a kid going, reed. The only cool thing that they ever made that had action features in terms of technology was the Starbird that, I don't know if you remember it, which was badass because it made this noise where, depending on how high it was and low it was, it could sense that and it would go, rear. I mean, that was cool. If you could get something that had generic sound effects, or it could shoot, make explosion noises or whatever, something that was generic that you could still in your imagination use. But when you're a kid, I don't need a toy to simulate an explosion because, whatever, doing it with your mouth. That was fun. It was fun to make the sounds, and you could always do it better with your mouth and your imagination than any of those idiots. And they never put sound effects that were loud enough. They were never loud enough. Nothing would ever be loud enough. They could never get enough power to put the amplification needed for the proper. I hated that shit. All I wanted was my toy to look as close as to be as close a representation to be the real thing as possible. I mean, as much as I like Mego figures, look at the first bridge playset we got, that famous vinyl, cardboard and vinyl bridge playset. I mean, it was the only thing you could get. But I'm like, why did they have to make it? It looks nothing like the Bridge of the Enterprise. Nothing. And it was always like, why does it have to look like this? Can't you, even as a kid, I was happy to get it. And the transporter feature, which was kind of cool. But even that was like, when they beam down, when they land, you come out the back door. It was so stupid. I mean, I went with it. But it's not until now. I think the reason that I love toys now, whether you're buying Bandai Soul Chogokin die-cast super robots from Japan, or you're getting Hot Toys. I mean, Hot Toys figures are the pinnacle of action figures. And even when they're not perfect, the clothes, the accessories, everything about them, it's high art. When Sideshow Toys came out, they were painting vinyl model kits, and Tom, who started Sideshow, I used to go visit him or just go to Kitcraft and look at his latest creations. The guy was an amazing figure painter. And I was like, God, what if he could open a company? Well, lo and behold, he did. Sideshow. And Sideshow has grown. Even their figures, they're not up to Hot Toy standards. But what I want for my licensed figures is, I don't care. Like, light up lightsabers are cool. I appreciate the fact that Hot Toys you have to put like 8 watch batteries in, and all the repulsors will light up. That's cool. I'll take that. Light up features are great. They're a pain in the ass, but they're great. But really, all I want from a toy, and what I think people want from toys, they just want the best representation of whatever it is they're getting. And now we're getting that. Now we've reached peak licensed property manufacturing, or whatever you want to call it. So I just think that what you're asking, what Kent was asking about, technology meets geek culture. Now we get the best model kits ever. We get the best representations of geek things that we could ever possibly get. That's why I still love model kits. I finally have an EVA pod from 2001, which I'm going to start building because I don't have a lot to do with Tango Shalom anymore. And aside from talking on YouTube to you beautiful people, I've got more time because I'm waiting for my sound mix to be done for Tango Shalom so I can oversee the sound design and the scoring so I can oversee the actual sound mix. But that's what I think is what we want. Anybody who's collecting something, you want the best representation of whatever it is to put on your shelf, because that's when it's cool. That's when it's the coolest. But in terms of technology, part of having a toy is being able to, in my mind, doing the music. I would sit and, do the music and sound effects. So, but I still think you're right. I should get Greg Smith to come on and talk about this. I want to thank you for that, but it's definitely a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And so, Kent, thank you for being, first of all, calling me Mr. Burnett all the time. Although you don't have to. You can call me Rob or Bob or Bobby or whatever it is you want to talk to me about. Well, everyone, this chat is approaching 2 hours. So I don't know if anybody is still paying attention. Donnie Pearson says, I gave the 20th Century Fox Fanfare my music mock-up cover treatment. I completed my mock-up cover of the old Warner Brothers Fanfare by Max Steiner, but will upload it to my SoundCloud page another time. Ooh, I'd love to hear that. Donnie Pearson also says, I gave another audio logo the NBC chimes. Doom, doom. I like that. So yeah, well, anyway, I am going to jump off this chat now because I have lots of work to do before this evening. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank people for supporting the channel, especially listening to me ramble on this Star Wars Day. It's truly Star Wars Day for me, at least the way I think about it. It's May 25th. It's Alien Day, the 40th anniversary of Alien Day. It's the week where we celebrate the anniversary of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which opened 35 years ago, which is crazy. Dawn of the Dead turned 40. Well, theoretically, its general release in the United States was yesterday. So I celebrate Dawn of the Dead still being one of my favorite films of all time, the original George Romero version. It's a great day for us geeks, us imagination connoisseurs, the members here of the Post-Geek Singularity community. I want to thank you for being here. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. Hit that little button, give me a little like, a thumbs up, and leave comments and participate. And I want to thank all of you regulars for being here and upping the discourse. It's always great to have you. I want to say thanks to Terry and Jim, my moderators who are here. Thanks for being moderators. Great guys you are. Really appreciate that too. Mike Bodden can't be here because he's traveling to Italy right now. So Godspeed, Mike. Have safe travels. Don't eat too much. And how cool is that? And thank everybody for writing. Thank you all to writing in letters at theburnettwork.net. Please check it out. And go to Lucky Tiger, getluckytiger.com, who sponsor this channel. And if you want to buy anything there, remember, punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity when you check out, and you get 20% off your order, which is pretty fantastic. And I think I'm actually going to start. I might build it on camera. I'm working on a 5-foot tall flying model rocket of a Saturn V, and I'd started it last year, but quite frankly, I messed it up. And David from Serious Rockets, I think it's Serious Rocketry. If you guys if you're interested in flying model rockets, I mean, I build flying model rockets. Some of them I don't even fly. I just build them because I like them. It's a vestige of my youth. As a matter of fact, well, I can't reach it right now, but I got my Estes Interceptor E over there. But I want to finish my 5-foot Saturn V and fly it for next July 20th is, of course, the 50th anniversary of the Apollo moon landing. By the way, Apollo 11, the documentary, the great documentary, some of it was shot in 70 millimeter, is now available on Blu-ray. So check that out. Maybe I should build the rest of my Saturn V. When I messed up, David from Serious Rocketry did send me replacement parts so I can redo what I messed up. So I want to thank you. Go to Serious. I think it's Serious Rocketry. If you're interested, he's got great rockets, but he makes the best Saturn V rocket kit that flies. You actually need an FAA waiver to fly it. So I guess I'll have to drive out to Palm Springs or something, or go to Joshua Tree, and maybe I'll do a live video and launch my Saturn V rocket, which apparently can go up to 10,000 feet, which would be kind of funny. But yeah, I should finally finish that sucker. But anyway, I want to thank you all for being here. Thanks for supporting the channel. And I will be back tomorrow. And I am going to be back tonight at 9 p.m. with Lucas Kendall. And we're going to talk about his film Skyfighter right back here on the Burnettwork. Check that out if you're awake, all of my international fans and followers. But I appreciate you all being here. And remember, every person that you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And I hope you all have a great Memorial Day weekend. Have some barbecue. Remember the fallen. Remember those who've given their lives in the service of this country. And My dad was a World War II vet. He actually flew on a plane with Douglas MacArthur once to Alaska. My dad was in communications. He was stationed in Alaska. That's why he had a fondness for the state. But yeah, my dad was actually in World War II. So he's obviously has been gone for over a decade, but I think about him every day. He was a great guy, Richard Burnett. So I always think about him on Memorial Day. Anyway, thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting the channel. And as always, have a better day.